Chicago. On a cold winter morning, the courtroom was filled with whispers. On the stand, a young woman stood tall, her sharp eyes scanning the skeptical faces. Maya Bennett, only 17 years old, was preparing to go head-to-head with one of the city's most powerful real estate tycoons. Before her stood William Reynolds, who had illegally evicted dozens of families from their homes, using his power and money to bend the law to his will. But today he faced an unlikely opponent, a teenage girl without a formal law degree, but with the intelligence and determination to shake the legal system. "You think you can beat us with a few pages of documents?" Reynolds sneered, his eyes filled with contempt. "No," Maya replied, her voice echoing throughout the room. "I will beat you with the truth." The courtroom fell silent. Maya has more than just legal documents. She has evidence, forged contracts, recordings that reveal the disgusting truth about how Reynolds manipulated the real estate market. But before she can make it public, something terrifying happens. A mysterious car accident that almost takes her life. This is no longer a simple lawsuit. This is a battle between justice and those who will stop at nothing to silence the truth. Reynolds has the best lawyers in the room, the police in his pocket, and even the most ruthless killers if necessary. But Maya also has weapons of her own, a team of brave men, a fearless spirit, and most of all, a secret that even Reynolds didn't see coming. Can a 17-year-old girl topple one of Chicago's most powerful forces? Will justice prevail, or will Maya become another victim buried under the evil plots of the powerful? Don't miss this dramatic story. Subscribe to Black Footprints now to follow the entire shocking case. Maya Bennett stood in the middle of the courtroom, her sharp brown eyes scanning the faces that stared at her in disbelief. She was only 17, petite, with curly black hair tied back, and in a navy blue suit that seemed a little too big for her. She looked like a child trying out for a lawyer in a school play. Murmurs rang out as she clutched her papers, walking toward the dock. Above her, Judge Richard Patterson regarded her through his half-rimmed glasses, his eyes filled with undisguised contempt. He was a man in his 60s, known for his cold demeanor and his belief that young people had no place in his courtroom. And a girl of color like Maya? He didn't even bother to hide the smirk on his face. "I assume she's lost?" He raised his voice, speaking slowly, emphasizing the word she, as if reminding everyone that she had no place here. "Who gave you permission to speak?" Maya clenched her fingers around the papers, taking a deep breath. She was used to the contempt, used to the looks that judged her not good enough, not smart enough, not strong enough. But today, she was going to change all that. She smiled a sharp smile. "Your Honor, I am the legal representative of Plaintiff Sarah Carter." Laughter erupted in the courtroom. Across the table, William Reynolds, a portly real estate mogul in an expensive suit, sneered, folding his arms and leaning back in his chair as if enjoying a comedy routine. "Really?" Patterson flipped through the papers in front of him. "You think you can stand here and go up against one of the city's most experienced attorneys with what? A fake degree from the internet?" The air in the room became stifling, but Maya did not flinch. She held her head high, her voice echoing throughout the room. Ms. Carter's lease was clearly violated. Not only did Mr. Reynolds illegally increase the rent, but he also used coercive means to evict her. She set the document down on the table, flipping through the pages with surprising confidence. "I have evidence here that he forged the eviction notice, and I even have recordings that prove he threatened other residents to force them to leave." The room fell silent. Reynolds froze, his eyes widening. Patterson frowned slightly, the lines on his forehead deepening. Maya continued, her voice unwavering. "And if anyone here doubts my competence," she pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, unfolded it, and held it up. "I passed the bar exam at the age of 16. I am fully qualified to stand before this court." Whispers began to spread throughout the courtroom. Patterson stared at her, seemingly torn between shock and confusion. Reynolds was pale and stiff. For the first time in her life, Maya saw the arrogance in Patterson's eyes falter. And for the first time, she knew she had them listening. Chicago winters were cold, with winds from Lake Michigan whipping around every corner and weaving through the alleys where Maya Bennett grew up. She lived with her grandmother, Eleanor Bennett, in a small but cozy apartment where the smell of herbal tea hung in the air and the bookshelves were stacked with old books, mostly law books. It wasn't children's reading, but Maya had never been a normal child. At age 7, when other children were learning to spell, Maya picked up a copy of the United States Constitution, flipping through the pages as if exploring a new world. Eleanor thought it was just childish curiosity, but then she was stunned to hear the little girl asking questions about the amendments, about citizenship, and about concepts that even many adults didn't bother with. At 12, Maya began sneaking into classes at Chicago Law School, sitting in the back rows, silently listening to the heated debates between students. Once a professor found her and, instead of sending her away, asked, "What do you think about Brown versus Board of Education?" Without hesitation, Maya responded with a point so sharp that the class fell silent. From that day on, she became a small legend on campus, a genius whose reasoning ability was on par with the best students. But genius doesn't always come easy. Maya grew up without a mother. She died shortly after giving birth to her. Her father? A name on a piece of paper? Nothing more. All she had was Eleanor, who devoted her life to raising her and protecting her from the injustices of the world. She taught her that life was never fair, but if she was strong enough, she could make it a little fairer. Maya's turning point came one gloomy afternoon when she was 15. On her way home, she heard sobbing. In the corner of the old apartment building, Sarah Carter, the woman who had brought her hot muffins every morning, stood there, clutching papers, her face streaked with tears. "They kicked me out, Maya," Sarah choked out. "I pay my rent on time, but Mr. Reynolds still tried to push me out." Maya saw the desperation in the woman's eyes. She couldn't stand the feeling of helplessness. She couldn't stand to see someone stripped of their home just because they were poor. That night, she sat in her small room, the desk lamp shining on the stacks of papers she'd been studying for years. She read about leases, tenants' rights, the loopholes landlords often took advantage of. And when the morning came, she knew what she had to do. No one believed a teenage girl could topple a real estate tycoon. But Maya didn't care. She didn't just want to prove them wrong. She wanted to win. And not for herself, but for Sarah, for people like Mrs. Carter, like her grandmother, like everyone else who has been crushed by society and never had a voice. And so the fight began. Maya sat at the old wooden desk in Eleanor's small apartment, the lamplight casting shadows on the papers spread out before her. She took a deep breath, tapping her fingers on the keyboard. The words in the letter carried no teenage anger, but were cold, sharp, like a knife cutting through lies. "Dear Mr. Reynolds, I am writing to inform you that your actions towards Sarah Carter are not only unethical, but also violate Illinois tenancy law. If you do not immediately cease your threatening behavior and restore full essential services to Mrs. Carter, I will not hesitate to take this matter to court. Sincerely, Maya Bennett." Maya pressed send, then leaned back in her chair. She knew the real estate mogul would not take the letter seriously, but it was the first warning. And as she had expected, Reynolds did not care. Just 3 days later, Sarah Carter called her, her voice shaking with cold and anger. "Maya, they cut off my water and electricity. It's the middle of winter, and I can't turn on the heat." Anger flared in Maya's chest. Fine, if Reynolds wanted to play dirty, she would show him what happened when he touched people who couldn't defend themselves. That night, Maya filed her lawsuit in Chicago. She was no longer a teenager making threats on paper. She was in for a real legal fight. At first, the lawsuit was just a small event among the hundreds of legal disputes that occurred every day. But when a Chicago Tribune reporter discovered that Sarah Carter's legal representative was only 17, the story spread like wildfire. Teen genius takes on real estate tycoon. 17-year-old challenges the legal system. Can she win? Maya Bennett, the new Erin Brockovich? Sensational headlines flooded the press and social media. Maya suddenly became a phenomenon. Major news outlets called for interviews. Television shows invited her to appear. But Maya wasn't interested in the limelight. She wasn't doing this for fame. She just wanted justice. Meanwhile, The legal community began to take notice of the case. Some admired her. Others were skeptical. What can a kid do in a case this big? A veteran Chicago attorney commented on television. She's smart, sure, but that doesn't mean she can beat a team of seasoned lawyers. Many wanted to help. A prominent law firm offered to represent Sarah Carter pro bono, but Maya refused. I appreciate it, she told them, but this is my fight, doubt and belief. The community began to split into two camps. One side has absolute faith in Maya, calling her a young genius, a new hope for justice. But on the other side, the skeptics, who believe she is just a child with unrealistic dreams, are waiting for the moment she collapses. Reynolds, who once considered her a joke, now begins to feel the pressure. He hires a team of top lawyers, tries to silence the press, bribes witnesses who might side with Maya. But she is not afraid, because she knows the truth is not a game that money can buy. The battle has truly begun. Maya had never believed Reynolds would leave her alone. People with power like him never fought fair. But she had never expected him to act so quickly and ruthlessly. That morning, as Maya walked out of her apartment to go to the courthouse, two uniformed police officers were waiting at the bottom of the stairs. One of them spoke up. "Ms. Maya Bennett?" Maya nodded, feeling something was wrong. "You're being summoned to the police station. There's a complaint that you tampered with evidence in the case against Mr. William Reynolds." Those words made her stomach clench. Reynolds had really screwed up. On the way to the police station, Maya texted Eleanor. When she called back, her voice was filled with concern. "Maya, you can't fight them. They don't play by the rules." She looked out the window, Chicago's tall buildings and crowded streets. This city belonged to the rich, the Reynolds, but she couldn't give up just because of that. "I know, Grandma," Maya said softly, "but if I back down now, I won't be me anymore." After 2 hours of questioning, the police were forced to release Maya because there was no evidence against her. But this wasn't a victory. It was just the first step in Reynolds' plan. He wanted to wear her down, distract her from the case. When Maya returned to her small office, a rented room with stacks of files on the desk, she sensed something was wrong. Reynolds couldn't have gotten her information so quickly unless someone on her team had told him. That evening, as she was sifting through old files, a man appeared at the door. He was tall, slim, in a faded leather jacket, with the cold eyes of someone used to digging up secrets. "Lucas Harper," he introduced himself, tossing a file onto Maya's desk. "I'm a private investigator." Maya glanced at the files on herself, on her family, on anything that could be used to blackmail her. "Reynolds hired you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice even. Harper shrugged. "He pays well." Maya's lips curled. "So, what are you doing here?" "To warn you," he said. "Someone in your group is selling information to Reynolds. He knows your every move before you make it." Maya felt a chill run down her spine. Someone in her group had betrayed her. She couldn't confront Reynolds when someone on the inside was leaking information. She had to set a trap. The next morning, Maya assembled her group, a small group of volunteers who had volunteered to assist her in her case. She looked at each one carefully, but none of them seemed suspicious. So she decided to test it. She created a fake document, a secret piece of evidence she had created to fool the traitor. It was a forged lease discovered in the city's archives that would completely destroy Reynolds' case in court. She placed the document in a red folder, placed it in the middle of her desk, and left the office. Now all she had to do was wait. If Reynolds heard about it, she would know who had betrayed her, and when the traitor showed up, she would be ready to strike back. Inside the courtroom, a pale yellow light fell on the long table where Maya Bennett stood across from Jacob Sterling, one of Chicago's most seasoned attorneys. Sterling had been in the practice for over 30 years, known for his ability to turn the tables and confuse witnesses with just a few questions. But today, he was not facing an ordinary person. Maya stood straight, her hands on the table, her gaze unwavering as Sterling approached, his gray suit neat, his smile confident. "Miss Bennett," he began, his voice low but tinged with sarcasm. "I must say, it is impressive that a young woman can stand here today. But experience and legal knowledge are really another matter. Do you really think you have what it takes to face us?" Maya curled her lips, gently placing her hand on the pile of documents in front of her. Mr. Sterling, experience does not always equate to truth. And today, the truth is not on your side. A low murmur rose in the courtroom. On the high bench, Judge Richard Patterson clasped his hands together, his eyes trained on Maya with a rare intensity. He had looked down on her before, thought she was just a kid, tried to be important. But today that had changed. The courtroom was tense. Maya picked apart Sterling's argument. She pointed out that the contract Reynolds had relied on to deport Sarah Carter was questionable. The letters were different, the dates didn't match. Sterling tried to argue, but each time he did, Maya hit back with a more pointed argument. You said this contract was signed in 2019, she said, holding the document up to the jury. But here we see a formatting error that only exists in the 2021 version of Microsoft Word. Now, I don't know if Mr. Reynolds has the ability to travel through time, but this is very suspicious. A chuckle echoed through the courtroom. Sterling frowned, and Reynolds clenched his fists. But Maya wasn't done yet. As the trial progressed, someone was working in the shadows. Aaron Lewis, a genius hacker and Maya's best friend. Sitting in front of 3 computer screens in a small apartment, Aaron scanned through a series of files. Maya had asked him to find anything that could tip the scales, and he did. The file was hidden on an internal server at Reynolds' company, an original contract that did not bear Sarah Carter's signature. The evidence was clear that Reynolds had forged the documents to get Mrs. Carter out of the house. Aaron immediately sent it to Maya. She opened the email, her eyes widening at the attachment. This was it. This was the final straw. Just as she was about to make her case in court. Bam! The crash was deafening. Everything spun. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Then darkness. When Maya opened her eyes, she found herself lying in a hospital bed. The room was white. The smell of antiseptic was strong. She tried to move, but pain shot through her shoulders and legs. Eleanor sat beside her, her eyes red. I was in a car accident, she said, her voice choking. Maya tried to remember. She was driving home from court, ready to continue preparing the documents. Then she remembered the screeching tires, the steering wheel losing control. Your brakes? Eleanor nodded. Someone cut them. Maya clenched her fists. This wasn't an accident. This was a warning. There was a knock on the door, and Aaron walked in, his face more serious than ever. I checked the cameras near the crash site, he said, placing his laptop on Maya's bed. And you wouldn't believe who was there before your car went out of control. Maya looked at the screen. Lucas Harper, the one she thought was just a hired investigator. The one who'd warned her about the mole in her group. He was the one who'd been there right before her car crashed. Maya felt her breathing slow. Reynolds was ready to do anything to shut her up, but she wasn't afraid. If he wanted to end this fight with violence, he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. Reynolds never accepted defeat. When he learned that Maya had recovered and was ready to return to court, he decided to strike a fatal blow, a blow that would completely destroy Sarah Carter's reputation and discredit Maya. That morning, the media reported, plaintiff Sarah Carter suspected of illegal income. The woman Maya Bennett protected was actually involved in money laundering. Maya got the news as soon as she entered the courthouse. She gripped her phone, anger rising inside her. Reynolds couldn't win legally, so he turned to his dirtiest trick, smearing Sarah's reputation. The trial began, and Sterling, Reynolds' lawyer, stepped forward with a smug smile. Your Honor, we have uncovered evidence that Sarah Carter has received a significant amount of money from a mysterious investment firm. If Miss Bennett is here to talk about innocence, perhaps she should explain how her client came to have such unaccounted funds. He slid a stack of documents onto the judge's desk, the numbers clearly visible. Tens of thousands of dollars have been transferred into Sarah Carter's account from a company called Lakeshore Investments. Sarah, sitting behind Maya, looked as if she had been struck by lightning. I've never seen that kind of money. Maya narrowed her eyes, knowing immediately that this was a trap. But she had an advantage Reynolds hadn't expected. In another corner of the city, Aaron Lewis was typing furiously on his keyboard. He wasn't in court, but he was Maya's secret weapon. He had dug into the Lakeshore Investments files, and what he found almost made him fall off his chair. The company hadn't existed before 6 months ago. The founder? An anonymous figure with ties to Reynolds' conglomerate. In other words, Reynolds had set up a fake company, transferred money to Sarah's account, and used it to frame her. Aaron immediately sent all this data to Maya. In the courtroom, Maya's phone rang. As she read Aaron's message, she smiled faintly. Reynolds had made a big mistake. She stood up, picked up a copy of the document on Sterling's desk, and held it up to Judge Patterson. Your Honor, I want to ask a simple question. If the investment company really exists, why did all its legal documents only appear in the last 6 months? And why is its CEO a fake name? A murmur broke out. Sterling paled. Reynolds, sitting behind him, gripped the arms of his chair. Maya continued, her voice booming. Your Honor, this is not evidence against my client. This is a scheme to deceive justice. Judge Patterson frowned, flipping through the papers again. Then he looked up, his eyes flashing with suspicion. Mr. Sterling, the court needs a good explanation for this. Sterling faltered. Reynolds sat back, looking ready to explode. But the blow wasn't over. Just as Sterling was trying to figure it out, a voice rang out from the courtroom doorway. I can help clear this up. Everyone turned. A middle-aged man entered, tall, thin, with gray hair and tired eyes. John Wallace, Reynolds' former CFO. Maya clenched her fists. This was the last piece she'd prepared. Wallace stepped up to the witness stand, took the oath, and took a deep breath. I used to work for William Reynolds, he said, his voice hoarse. And I have evidence that he falsified documents to evict poor tenants from his properties. A tremor ran through the courtroom. Reynolds jumped to his feet, his face red. Wallace, shut up. Judge Patterson rapped his gavel on the table. Mr. Reynolds, keep order in the courtroom. Wallace continued, his voice low but firm. I have emails, text messages, and documents that prove that Reynolds directed the creation of Lakeshore Investments to trap Sarah Carter. Maya nodded. So, Your Honor, she said, turning back to the jury, we're seeing who the liar is here. There was no doubt now. The verdict was decided. The courtroom erupted as Judge Patterson banged his gavel and announced, Plaintiff Sarah Carter wins. The forged lease is officially void. Maya stood there, speechless for a few seconds. Then she heard cheers. Sarah Carter burst into tears, hugging her son. Maya's supporters applauded, some shouting with joy. But no one applauded louder than Eleanor. She stood up, her eyes welling up, and when Maya turned to look at her, she simply nodded. No words were needed. Maya had done it. On the other side of the room, William Reynolds sat frozen, his face as white as a sheet. Then the door to the courtroom burst open. The FBI swarmed in. An agent walked straight up to Reynolds, waving an arrest warrant in his face. William Reynolds, you're under arrest for wire fraud, witness tampering, and forgery. Reynolds opened his mouth to protest, but then he realized it was futile. Maya took one last look at him. The face of the man who had once stood at the pinnacle of power, now contorted with panic. When the handcuffs were clamped around Reynolds' wrists, Maya felt no pleasure. She felt only relief. But she had been naive to think that it was over. 2 days after the resounding victory, when the public was still talking about the shocking lawsuit, Maya received an envelope. No sender, no postmark, just a simple piece of paper with the words written coldly in black ink. Reynolds is just a pawn. You're playing a dangerous game. Stop before it's too late. Maya read the words over and over again, feeling a chill run down her spine. Reynolds was not the only one behind these atrocities. There was another force, something bigger, more dangerous. She closed her eyes, trying to think. Then another feeling came over her, the feeling of being watched. Maya turned. Through the small window of the coffee shop, she saw a figure standing across the street. Lucas Harper. He hadn't disappeared after the lawsuit. He was still here. Maya stood up and pushed the door open, but when she got there, Harper was gone. Only a small piece of paper was stuck to her windshield. If you continue, you'll be dealing with people you shouldn't be messing with. The wind blew Maya's hair, but she didn't flinch. She knew she was in a bigger fight than Reynolds, and she had no intention of backing down. 3 months after her shocking lawsuit, Maya Bennett stepped up to the podium to speak in a packed auditorium. Camera flashes were flashing everywhere, and hundreds of pairs of eyes were on her, people who had believed in her and supported her throughout. She cleared her throat, looking around at the audience, from displaced families to oppressed workers to activists. "We've won the battle," she began, her voice strong. "But the fight is not over." The room fell silent, waiting. "I thought that if we brought someone like William Reynolds to justice, things would change. But the truth is, Reynolds was just a cog in a corrupt system where power and money always seek to trample on the weak." She paused, letting the words sink in. "So I won't stop. Today, I officially launched the Justice Collective, an organization that defends the voiceless, those oppressed by the powers that be." The applause grew louder and louder. Sarah Carter, the woman she had fought to protect, stood, her eyes brimming with pride. Eleanor, though she didn't like Maya putting herself in danger, couldn't hide her emotion. The press had called her a hero, a legal genius, a symbol of justice. But Maya knew better than anyone. This was just the beginning. That night, Maya stood in front of a skyscraper, neon lights reflecting off the rain-soaked sidewalk. Hamilton Properties, one of the largest real estate companies in the United States. It was also where Reynolds had worked before starting her own company. She knew that the people behind him were still there, hidden behind the high-rise offices, the $1,000 suits, and the handshakes in the shadows. Maya tightened her grip on the briefcase in her hand. Reynolds was just the beginning. Darkness enveloped the street, but she was not afraid. A new journey had begun, and this time, she was ready.